The concrete dust still hung in the air when Karen stormed across the property line, her face twisted with rage. "You destroyed my view, my property value, my entire life," she screamed, jabbing her manicured finger at the fresh dirt where David's pool once sparkled. What she didn't know was that beneath that innocent-looking soil lay something far more valuable than any swimming pool, something that would make her accusations of trauma seem laughably insignificant. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, they weren't investigating a neighbor dispute. They were about to uncover a secret that would turn Karen's perfect suburban world into a living nightmare. The demolition crew's final sledgehammer blow echoed across Willowbrook Estates like a death knell. David Chen stood at his kitchen window, watching the last chunks of concrete disappear into the growing crater that had once been his backyard. Oasis, 23 years. 23 years of birthday parties, summer barbecues, and quiet morning swims before the world woke up. All of it reduced to rubble and memory in the span of 3 days. "You sure about this, Mr. Chen?" called out Miguel, the crew foreman, wiping concrete dust from his weathered hands. "That was a beautiful pool. Shame to see it go." David stepped outside, his bare feet finding the warm grass at the pool's edge. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the destruction, and for a moment he could almost see the ghosts of summers past, his daughter Emma's first swimming lesson, the neighborhood kids' laughter bouncing off the water, his late wife, Sarah, floating on her back, eyes closed, completely at peace. "I'm sure," he said, though his voice caught slightly. "It's time." The truth was more complicated than he could explain to Miguel or anyone else. The pool had become a monument to loss, a daily reminder of the life that had been ripped away from him 18 months ago. Every morning he'd catch himself setting out 2 coffee cups, expecting Sarah to emerge from the house in her faded University of Michigan sweatshirt, ready for their ritual morning swim. The silence that followed was becoming unbearable. But there was another reason one he'd shared with no one. Not even Emma during their weekly video calls from her graduate program in Boston. The pool had been Sarah's obsession, her sanctuary, and in her final months, as the cancer ravaged her body, she'd spent hours floating in the warm water, finding relief from the pain that no medication could touch. Keeping it felt like keeping her trapped there, suspended in those final terrible days. "We'll have the dirt delivered tomorrow," Miguel continued, checking his clipboard. "Should have everything leveled and seeded by Wednesday." "Your wife's garden idea, right?" David nodded, unable to correct him. Sarah had indeed dreamed of converting the space into a wildflower garden native, Michigan flora that would attract butterflies and hummingbirds. She'd sketched the design during her last hospital stay, her thin fingers struggling to hold the pencil steady. "Promise me," she'd whispered, "when you're ready, you'll let something beautiful grow here again." He'd kept that promise buried for a year and a half, but watching Emma graduate from college via video call last month, seeing her try to hide her tears when she spoke about visiting, Mom's pool had finally given him the courage to act. The demolition crew packed up their equipment as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. David walked the perimeter of the empty space, noting the straight lines where the pool deck had been, the slightly raised areas where the system had lived. Tomorrow, it would all be filled in, and by fall, Sarah's wildflowers would be pushing through the soil. He was lost in these thoughts when the shouting started. "What have you done?" The voice cut through the evening air like a blade. David turned to see Karen Prescott charging across the perfectly manicured lawn that separated their properties. Her usually immaculate blonde hair disheveled, her face flushed with an emotion somewhere between rage and panic. Karen had lived next door for 15 years, but their relationship had always been cordial at best. She was the self-appointed guardian of Willowbrook Estate's property values, the woman who measured her neighbor's grass height and submitted formal complaints to the homeowners association about anything that didn't meet her exacting standards. Her own property was a showcase of suburban perfection, every shrub precisely trimmed, every flower bed color-coordinated, every surface power-washed to gleaming cleanliness. "I didn't. Here, you come over. You destroyed it," she cried, gesturing wildly at the empty space. 23 years I've looked out my kitchen window at that beautiful pool. Do you have any idea what you've done to my property value? To the whole neighborhood." David felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he had to explain himself these days. "It's my property, Karen. I have every right to rights." she interrupted, her voice climbing to a pitch that made several windows light up in nearby houses. What about my rights? What about the trauma you've caused me? I've been planning my retirement around the view from my deck, around the ambience that pool provided, and you just destroyed it, without even asking. The word trauma hung in the air between them like a challenge. David thought about real trauma, about holding Sarah's hand as the machines fell silent, about Emma's broken sobs echoing through their empty house, about the way grief could hollow you out until you were nothing but skin stretched over an ache that never stopped. I'm sorry you're upset, he said, fighting to keep his voice level. But this wasn't a decision I made lightly. I'm planning to plant a garden here, something that will be beautiful in its own way. A garden. Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. Do you think some weeds and wildflowers can replace what you've taken from me? From all of us. She swept her arm toward the other houses, as if the entire neighborhood stood behind her. This is property destruction. This is emotional assault. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd known Karen was difficult, demanding, but he'd never seen her like this, eyes wild, hands shaking, her whole body vibrating with a fury that seemed disproportionate to the situation. I think you should go home, Karen, he said quietly. We can talk about this when you've had time to calm down. Calm down, she shrieked. You want me to calm down? I'm calling the police. I'm calling the homeowners association. I'm calling everyone who needs to know that David Chen thinks he can just destroy other people's lives without consequences. She was already pulling out her phone, her fingers flying over the screen with practiced efficiency. David watched in growing disbelief as she placed not one call, but 3 police, HOA president, and someone she referred to as my lawyer. Yes, hello, this is Karen Prescott at 1247 Willowbrook Circle, she said into the phone, her voice taking on the crisp, authoritative tone she used for all official business. I need to report property damage and emotional distress caused by my neighbor. ... Yes, I'll hold. David stood frozen, watching this woman he'd barely interacted with for 15 years transform into something unrecognizable. Other neighbors had begun to emerge from their houses, the Johnsons from across the street, the elderly Kowalskis from 2 doors down, even the Morrison teenagers, drawn by the commotion like moths to flame. Karen, he tried again, his voice barely above a whisper. Please, my wife died. The pool. It was too painful to keep. For a moment, her expression flickered, something almost human crossing her features. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that same wild intensity. Everyone has pain, David, she said, lowering the phone, but not ending the call. But we don't get to inflict it on others. We don't get to destroy things that don't belong to us just because we're hurting. It's my pool. The words exploded out of him loud enough that several neighbors took a step back. It was my wife's pool, in my backyard, on my property. Didn't destroy anything of yours. You destroyed my peace, she shot back. You destroyed my sense of security. You destroyed my faith that I live in a civilized neighborhood where people have consideration for others. The police sirens started. As a distant wail, growing closer with each passing second, David felt the surreal quality of the moment settle over him like a fog. 6 hours ago, he'd been making peace with his decision, feeling something close to hope for the first time in months. Now he was standing in his own backyard, about to be questioned by police because his neighbor considered his grief an act of aggression. The first squad car pulled into his driveway just as the sun touched the horizon, its red and blue lights painting the remaining daylight in alternating shades of emergency. Officer Martinez emerged first, a compact woman with intelligent eyes and the practiced calm of someone who'd seen every variety of human drama. Good evening, she said, her gaze taking in the scene with professional efficiency. We got a call about property damage and harassment. Karen stepped forward immediately, her earlier hysteria replaced by the righteous composure of someone who believed absolutely in the justice of their cause. Officer, thank you for coming so quickly. I'm Karen Prescott, and I live next door. This man, she pointed at David as if he were a dangerous criminal, has willfully destroyed a pool that's been a cornerstone of our neighborhood for over 2 decades. He's caused me severe emotional trauma, damaged my property. The Willowbrook police station's interview rooms smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. David sat across from Detective Ray Castellanos, A weathered man in his 50s whose tired eyes suggested he'd seen enough human nature to surprise him. Very little. The corroded metal box sat between them on the scarred table like an accusation waiting to be opened. "Let me get this straight," Detective Castellanos said, flipping through his notes. "You decide to remove a pool from your own property. Your neighbor calls the cops, claiming emotional trauma. And then your demolition crew finds a 15-year-old buried box with her initials on it." "That's exactly what happened," David said, still struggling to process the surreal turn his evening had taken. "I've never seen that box before in my life." The detective's radio crackled. "Castellanos here." "What do you mean she's gone? Check the airports." "Yeah? Put out a bolo." David felt ice form in his stomach. "Gone. Your neighbor, Mrs. Prescott. When Officer Martinez went to follow up with her, she found the house empty. Clothes missing, car gone, no note." Detective Castellanos leaned back in his chair. People don't usually flee their homes over pool. Removal disputes. The box seemed to grow heavier with implication. David stared at the corroded initials K.P., wondering how many times Karen had walked past his pool knowing her secret lay buried beneath it. "Detective, I need to ask you something," David said slowly. "How long has it been since someone reported a missing person in Willowbrook Estates?" Castellanos' expression sharpened. "Why do you ask?" "Because 15 years ago, when Karen moved in, she seemed ... different. My wife Sarah mentioned it. Once, said Karen acted like someone running from something." The detective made a note. "Different how?" David searched his memory for details he'd never thought important. "She paid cash for her house. Sarah thought that was odd. Who pays cash for a $400,000 home? And she never talked about where she came from, never mentioned family or friends from before. It was like her life started the day she moved to Willowbrook." "Mr. Chen, I need to ask you to step outside for a moment." David found himself in the hallway, watching through the window as Detective Castellanos made a series of phone calls. Through the glass, he could see the detective's expression growing increasingly grim. With each conversation, 20 minutes later, the door opened. "Mr. Chen, I need you to see something." Back in the interview room, Detective Castellanos had spread several photographs across the table. Missing person flyers, David realized, all dated from 15 to 16 years ago, different states, different jurisdictions, but something about the pattern made his blood run cold. Jennifer Walsh disappeared from Portland, Oregon. 16 years ago, the detective said, pointing to the first photo. Michelle Chono, relation to Uvanish, from Sacramento, 15 years ago. Patricia Donovan, missing from Denver, the same year. David studied the faces, different hair colors, different styles, but there was something familiar about the bone structure, the shape of the eyes. "Detective, are you saying?" "I'm saying we've been running Karen Prescott's information through national databases while we waited for the warrant to open that box. The social security number she used to buy her house, it belonged to a woman who died in a car accident in Florida 20 years ago." The room felt like it was tilting. David gripped the edge of the table. "So Karen Prescott isn't even her real name? We don't know who she really is. But we know what she did." Detective Castellanos pulled out another set of photos, crime scene images that made David's stomach lurch. "Mr. Chen, every one of these missing women was buried in their own backyard, under pools, patios, garden sheds, places where the concrete would hide the smell, where no one would think to look." David's mouth went dry. "You think Karen? You think she killed someone?" "I think your neighbor has been living under a stolen identity for 15 years, and the timing of her arrival in Willowbrook coincides perfectly with a string of unsolved disappearances across the western United States." The detective leaned forward. "The question is, who's in that box?" Before David could respond, there was a knock on the door. Officer Martinez entered, holding a tablet and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "Detective, you need to see this. We ran the missing persons reports from the time frame when Prescott moved to Willowbrook. Look at this." She set the tablet on the table, and David found himself staring at a missing person flyer that made his blood freeze. Missing, Rebecca Martinez, age 28, last seen, Willowbrook Estates neighborhood date, October 15th, 15 years ago. Was working as a real estate agent, showing houses in new development. "Oh my God," David whispered. "Rebecca was my cousin," Officer Martinez said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. She was showing houses in Willowbrook the week before. Karen Prescott moved in. She was supposed to meet a potential buyer at 1247 Willowbrook, circle the house Karen ended up purchasing. Rebecca never came home. Detective Castellanos was already reaching for the evidence kit. Mr. Chen, I'm sorry, but we need to treat your entire property as a crime scene now. This box, ... He gestured toward it with latex-gloved hands. This might be the first real lead we've had in 15 years. The metal was so corroded that it took careful work with specialized tools to open it without destroying potential evidence. David watched, feeling like he was trapped in someone else's nightmare, as the detective slowly lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in what had once been plastic but was now a deteriorated mess, were personal items. A driver's license in a waterproof case, Rebecca Martinez's driver's license, a gold necklace with a small cross, a real estate business card, soggy and barely legible, and at the bottom, a cell phone that had somehow survived 15 years of burial. "This is it," Officer Martinez whispered, and David could hear the grief and rage warring in her voice. "This is Rebecca's phone. She had one of those early indestructible models." Detective Castellanos was already calling the forensics team. "We need ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, the works. If Rebecca Martinez is buried on that property, we're going to find her." David felt the room spinning around him. "Detective, my wife and I lived there for 23 years. We swam in that pool almost every day. We had barbecues, parties. If there was a body, bodies decompose, Mr. Chen. After 15 years under concrete and chlorinated water, there might not be much left, but there will be something. There's always something." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. David's property was cordoned off with crime scene tape. Floodlights turned his backyard into something from a movie set. Neighbors gathered on the street in small clusters, their voices carrying snatches of conversation. "Can you believe it? I always thought she was strange, ... Poor David. First his wife, now this." Detective Castellanos found David sitting on his front steps at nearly midnight, watching the organized chaos that had overtaken his life. "Mr. Chen, we're going to need you to stay somewhere else for a few days while we process the scene. Do you have family nearby?" "My daughter Emma is in Boston," David said numbly. "I should call her, but how do you explain this?" "You tell her the truth, that you did nothing wrong and that removing your pool may have helped solve a 15-year-old murder case." David looked up at the detective. "How many others do you think there are? Based on the pattern we're seeing, could be dozens." "Karen Prescott, whoever she really is, appears to have been very good at what she did. New identity, new town. Find an isolated victim, bury them where no one would look, and move on. But why stay here so long? Why break the pattern?" Detective Castellanos was quiet for a moment. Sometimes predators get comfortable. Maybe she thought she'd found the perfect hiding spot. A nice neighborhood, respectable cover, a concrete pool that would hide any evidence forever. He paused. The implications of that statement hit David like a physical blow. "You think she was going to kill someone else? Mr. Chen, your wife died 18 months ago. You've been living alone in that house ever since. You're grieving, isolated, predictable in your routines." The detective let the words hang in the air. "From a predator's perspective, you would have been an ideal target." David felt something cold and sick settle in his stomach. All those times Karen had stopped by to check on him after Sarah's death. Her offers to help with grocery shopping, her insistence that he shouldn't be alone so much. He'd thought she was being neighborly. "She was watching me," he whispered. "That's our working theory. The pool removal probably panicked her. She knew if you decided to dig deeper, plant trees, maybe put in a foundation for something else, ... she would have been exposed. So she tried to stop you, the only way she knew, how by causing a scene, getting the police involved, maybe hoping to create enough legal trouble that you'd abandon the project." Detective Castellanos stood up. Instead, she buried herself. A shout from the backyard made them both turn. One of the forensics technicians was running toward them, his face pale in the floodlights. "Detective, you need to see this. The ground-penetrating radar. There's something else down there, something big." They followed the technician back to where the pool had been. The radar equipment painted an image. David's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the lawn chair that someone had brought from his patio. his mind spinning as fragments of memory crashed against each other like broken glass. The detective's question echoed in his skull. When was the last time you actually saw your wife alive? She was sleeping, he whispered, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. It was early morning. Karen came over to check on Usrid, been helping with Sarah's care those last few weeks. She said I looked exhausted, that I should go rest while she sat with Sarah. Detective Castellanos sat down across from him, pulling out a notebook. How long were you asleep? I don't know. Hours. When I woke up, Karen was crying, she said. She said Sarah had passed peacefully in her sleep, that she'd held her hand at the end. David's voice cracked. She said Sarah asked her to take care of me. And then what happened? The memories were coming back in jagged pieces now, details he'd buried in the fog of grief, suddenly sharp and clear. Karen handled everything. She called the hospice nurse, the funeral home, Emma. She said I was too distraught to deal with the arrangements. She insisted on a closed casket, said Sarah would have wanted to be remembered as she was before the cancer. Detective Castellanos exchanged a look with Officer Martinez, who had been standing silently nearby. Mr. Chen, did you ever see your wife's body after Karen told you she had died? No, Karen said it would be too traumatic, that it was better to remember her alive. David felt something cold and terrible spreading through his chest. Oh my God, what are you telling me? We're not telling you anything yet. We're asking questions. The detective's voice was gentle but firm. Can you think of any reason why Karen would have wanted to harm your wife? David's mind raced backward through the months before Sarah's death. The cancer had been brutal stage for pancreatic cancer, with a prognosis measured in weeks, not months. Sarah had been in agony despite the pain medication, barely able to eat, spending most days drifting in and out of consciousness. But there had been good days too. Days when the pain receded enough for her to sit by the pool, to work on her garden. Sketches, to talk about Emma's future and David's life after she was gone. And it was during one of those conversations that Sarah had said something that had seemed insignificant at the time. Karen's been asking a lot of questions about our finances. Sarah had mentioned one afternoon, her voice weak but troubled, about life insurance, about what you'll do with the house. I told her it was none of her business, but she got upset, said she was just trying to help. Sarah mentioned that Karen had been asking about our finances. David said slowly, about insurance policies, investments. At the time, I thought she was just being nosy. But but what? Our life insurance policy was substantial. $2 million. Sarah made me promise I'd use it to travel, to see the world we'd never had time to explore together. David's hands were shaking now. If Sarah died naturally, the money would come to me. But if something happened to me too, who would inherit Emma? But she's only 22. The policy has a provision that if something happened to both of us before Emma turned 25, a designated guardian would manage the inheritance. David felt bile rise in his throat. Sarah changed the guardian designation 6 months before she died. She said we needed someone local, someone who knew us well. Detective Castellanos leaned forward. Who did she designate? Karen Prescott. Words hung in the air like an accusation. Around them, the excavation continued, but David could barely hear it over the roaring in his ears. Everything was falling into place with horrible clarity. Karen's sudden helpfulness during Sarah's illness, her insistence on handling the funeral, arrangements, her constant presence in the months after Sarah's death. She was planning to kill me too, David whispered. She was waiting for the right moment. That's our working theory, Detective Castellanos confirmed. We think she saw an opportunity when your wife got sick. Gain her trust, become indispensable, manipulate the insurance beneficiary, then eliminate both targets when the timing was right? Officer Martinez's radio crackled, and she stepped away to answer it. When she returned, her face was grim. Detective, that was the lab. They've got preliminary results from the phone found in the buried box. And there are text messages. The last ones sent were to someone named Sarah Chen. David felt the world stop spinning. What did they say? Officer Martinez looked at her notes. The last message was sent the night before your wife allegedly died. It said, everything is ready. He suspects nothing. Tomorrow, we end this. Doesn't make sense, David said desperately. Sarah couldn't have been texting. She was barely conscious those last few days. Mr. Chen, Detective Castellanos said carefully. We think Karen was texting herself, using Rebecca Martinez's phone, creating a false trail to make it look like your wife was complicit in some kind of plan. But why would she need that? Insurance fraud investigation. If questions were ever raised about the deaths, the text messages would suggest your wife was involved in planning something. It would muddy the waters, create reasonable doubt. David's phone rang, jarring him back to the present. Emma's name. Flashed on the screen his daughter, calling for their weekly check-in. Having no idea her father was sitting in the middle of a crime scene, learning that her mother might have been murdered. I can't, he said, staring at the phone. I can't tell her this. Not yet. Answer it, Detective Castellanos said. Act normal, but don't mention any of this until we know more. David's hands shook as he accepted the call. Hi, sweetheart, Dad. How are you feeling about the pool? I know it was a big decision. Emma's voice was bright and warm, and hearing it made David want to cry. It's been an eventful day, he managed. Are you okay? You sound strange, just tired. The construction crew left a mess, and I've been dealing with some neighbor issues. Neighbor issues? Let me guess Karen's complaining about something. The casual way Emma said Karen's name made David's stomach lurch. His daughter had no idea she was talking about a woman who might have murdered her mother. Something like, that Emma should go. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Okay, but Dad, I'm proud of you for doing this. Mom would be so happy about the garden. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. David ended the call and immediately bent over, retching into the grass. Detective Castellanos waited patiently until the spasm passed. We need to know everything about your wife's final weeks, he said. Every interaction with Karen, every conversation, every detail you can remember. For the next hour, David forced himself to relive those terrible final days, but now every memory was poisoned with suspicion. Karen bringing soup that Sarah couldn't. Keep down Karen, insisting on staying overnight to help. Karen suggesting that David needed sleeping pills to cope with the stress. Karen handling all the phone calls, all the arrangements, inserting herself so seamlessly into their lives that David had been grateful rather than suspicious. She drugged me, David realized suddenly. The night Sarah died, Karen brought me. Dinner said I needed to keep my strength up. I remember feeling unusually drowsy, like I couldn't stay awake, even though I wanted to be with Sarah. What kind of medication was your wife taking for pain? Morphine. High doses because of how advanced the cancer was. Detective Castellanos made a note. Easy enough to slip extra into your food. Keep you unconscious while she did what she needed to do. The forensics team had set up a tent over the excavation site, and David could see them working, with painstaking care to uncover and document everything they found. The thought that Sarah had been lying under their pool all this time, while he'd been swimming above her grave, made him physically ill. Detective called one of the technicians from the tent. You need to see this. They walked over to where the second body had been uncovered. The forensics photographer was documenting every detail, but even David could see what had caught the technician's attention. The body was wearing Sarah's clothing, Sarah's jewelry, even Sarah's wedding ring. But something was wrong with the skull. Blunt. Force trauma, the medical examiner said, pointing to a visible fracture. This woman was struck in the head with significant force. This wasn't a natural death. David felt his knees buckle again, but this time Detective Castellanos caught his arm. I'm sorry, Mr. Chen. I know this is devastating, but we need you to stay focused. David's mind was reeling, but one memory surfaced with painful clarity. The hospice nurse, he said suddenly. She was supposed to come that morning, the morning Sarah died, but Karen called and canceled her. Said Sarah had taken a turn for the worse and didn't want visitors. Do you remember the nurse's name? Linda. Linda Garrison. She'd been coming twice a week for months. She knew Sarah's condition better than anyone. Detective Castellanos was already reaching for his phone. We need to talk to her immediately. While the detective made arrangements to contact the hospice nurse, David found himself staring at the excavation site where his wife's body had been hidden. 15 years, Karen had lived next door. 15 years of being the perfect neighbor, the concerned friend, the helpful widow who'd stepped in during his darkest hour. Mr. Chen. He turned to find Officer Martinez holding an Avid. Emma, listen to me very carefully, David said, his voice steady despite the terror clawing at his chest. "Do not go near that woman. Do not let her into your building. Call 911 right now." "Dad, you're scaring me. What's going on?" Detective Castellanos grabbed the phone. "Emma, this is Detective Castellanos with the Willowbrook Police. I need you to describe this woman to me. Okay, ... She's blonde, maybe 50-something, very well dressed. She said she was a family friend, that she had news about my father's health." Emma's voice was getting smaller, more frightened. "She knew things about my graduate program where I work part-time. She even knew about Mom's garden project. Where are you right now?" "I'm in my apartment on the 3rd floor, but Detective, she's not outside anymore. I looked out my window and I can't see her." Detective Castellanos' face went pale. "Emma, I need you to check that your door is locked and deadbolted. Then I want you to go into your bathroom. It's probably the only room with no window. Stay there until Boston PD arrives." "What? Why would I?" "Because the woman asking about you is a serial killer and she murdered your mother." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like eternity. When Emma spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "What did you say?" David took the phone back, his hands shaking. "Sweetheart, I know this is impossible to understand. I'm still trying to understand it myself. But the woman who's been our neighbor for 15 years, who helped us during Mom's illness, she's not who we thought she was." "Karen? You're talking about Karen? She killed Mom M. and Rebecca Martinez before that. Probably dozens of others. We found bodies under our pool." Emma's sob cut through the phone like a blade. "Bodies, Mom's. The police are handling everything. Here, right now, the only thing that matters is keeping you safe." David looked at Detective Castellanos, who was coordinating with Boston authorities on his radio. "Emma, are you in the bathroom?" "Yes, but Dad, I'm so scared. How did she find me? How did she know where I live?" That was the question that had been gnawing at David since Karen's text. How had a woman who'd supposedly fled the country 12 hours ago managed to track down his daughter in Boston? Detective David called out, "The flight to Mexico City we sure she was on it." Castellanos covered his radio. Airport security confirmed a woman matching her description and using Linda Hoffman's passport boarded the plane. But what if she had help? What if Linda Hoffman is another stolen identity, another person in her network? The detective's expression darkened. "You think there are others?" Before David could answer, Officer Martinez burst into their conversation. Holding a tablet with urgent intensity, "Detective, we've been cross-referencing missing persons cases with Karen's timeline, and we found something. Every city where she's lived, every identity she's used there are always 2 disappearances. A real estate agent or insurance broker first, then a wealthy widow or widower 6 months to a year later. She has a partner," David realized. "Someone who scouts the targets, someone who handles logistics, or multiple partners." Martinez continued. "Look at this pattern: San Diego, Phoenix, Denver, Sacramento, Portland, then here. In each city, the first victim is always someone with access to personal and financial information. The second victim is always someone recently bereaved with substantial assets." Detective Castellanos was processing this information at lightning speed. So Rebecca Martinez wasn't random. She was targeted because she could provide access to grieving homebuyers, people who might be vulnerable to manipulation. "And now Emma's in Boston for graduate school," David said. The implications hitting him like a physical blow. If something happened to me, Karen would have control of the insurance money until Emma turned 25. But if something happened to Emma too, the money would default to the estate, which Karen could potentially claim as the designated guardian. Detective Castellanos was already back on his radio. "Boston PD, this is Detective Castellanos in Willowbrook. We have a potential serial killer targeting a young woman in Cambridge. I need units at ... He looked at David. 15 Brattle Street, apartment 3B, David said. 15 Brattle Street, apartment 3B. Suspect is considered extremely dangerous and may have accomplices." David's phone buzzed with another text from Emma. "Dad, someone's trying to open my door. I can hear them working on the lock." "They're in the building," David said, his voice tight with panic. "Detective, please." "Emma," Castellanos said into the phone, "Boston PD is 2 minutes away. I need you to stay exactly where you are and stay on the line with us." The next 90 seconds were the longest of David's life. He could hear Emma's terrified breathing through the phone, punctuated by the sound of someone systematically working through the locks on her apartment door. Modern deadbolts and chain locks. But David remembered how efficiently Karen had handled every detail of Sarah's death, how smoothly she'd managed complex arrangements. This was someone who planned for contingencies. "I can hear them inside now," Emma whispered. "They're in my living room." "Stay quiet," Detective Castellanos instructed. "Don't make any noise." Through the phone, they could hear careful footsteps moving through Emma's apartment, the sound of dresser drawers being opened, papers being shuffled. Whoever was in there was searching for something specific. "Where are the sirens?" David demanded. "Where are the police?" "They're coming, Mr. Chen." Sometimes 2 minutes feels like Emma's scream cut through the phone like a gunshot. The bathroom door had been found. "Emma?" David shouted into the phone, but the line had gone dead. Detective Castellanos was shouting into his radio, demanding updates from Boston PD. But David wasn't listening anymore. He was remembering Sarah's final weeks, the way Karen had smoothly inserted herself into their lives, how she'd anticipated every need, solved every problem. A woman that organized, that methodical, wouldn't leave Emma's location to chance. "She's been planning this for months," David said suddenly. "Karen didn't just find out about Emma's address today. She's been tracking her, studying her routine, waiting for the right moment." "What do you mean?" "Think about it. Emma's in graduate school in Boston. Easy to track her through university records if you know how to access them. And Karen would know how, because she's done this before." David felt pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. The first victim in each city was always someone with access to personal information. Real estate agents, insurance brokers. What if some of them weren't victims at all? What if some of them were recruits? Detective Castellanos stopped shouting into his radio. "You think Rebecca Martinez was working with Karen?" "No. Rebecca was definitely murdered. We found her body. But what if Karen has been building a network over the years? People who help her research targets, track their families, handle logistics." Officer Martinez looked up from her tablet. "Detective, I've been going through the evidence from Karen's house before she fled. Look at this." She showed them a photograph of what appeared to be a home office, multiple computer monitors, filing cabinets full of documents, walls covered with maps and photographs. "This isn't the setup of someone working alone," she continued. "This is a command center. And look at this." She swiped to another photo, showing a bulletin board covered with photographs and personal information. "There are pictures of Emma here, dating back 6 months. Her class schedule, her work schedule, her apartment, building layout." David felt sick. "She's been stalking my daughter for months. Not just stalking, planning." Detective Castellanos pointed to additional photos showing what appeared to be surveillance equipment, multiple cell phones, and stacks of fake identification documents. "Mr. Chen, your neighbor was running a sophisticated criminal enterprise." David's phone rang again. Unknown number. "Answer it," Detective Castellanos said, signaling to Officer Martinez to start tracing the call. "Hello, David." Karen's voice was calm, almost cheerful. "I told you some secrets should stay buried. Where's my daughter?" David's voice was raw with rage and fear. "Emma's fine for now. She's a lovely girl, so much like her mother. Sarah was such a fighter, right until the end. Did you know her last words were about you? She said she was sorry she couldn't protect you from what was coming." David gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. "If you hurt her—" "What, David? Call the police. They're a little busy right now, don't you think?" Karen's laugh was light, conversational. "Besides, I'm not going to hurt Emma. I'm going to give her a choice." "What kind of choice?" "She can come with me willingly, and you'll never see her again, but you'll know she's alive. Or she can stay, and you'll get to bury what's left of her next to your wife." The line went quiet, except for the sound of someone crying in the background. David realized, his heart breaking. "There's a third option," Karen continued. "You come to Boston. You bring that insurance policy, documentation, sign everything over to me, and maybe we can work something out." "Done," David said immediately. "Whatever you want, just don't hurt her." "I thought you might see reason. There's a warehouse at 47 Industrial Way in Cambridge. You have 2 hours to get here. Come alone, bring the insurance documents, and David—" her voice hardened. "If I see a single police officer, Emma dies, and this time there won't even be a body to bury." The line went dead. Detective Castellanos was already